From courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast, a weekly show for basketball gamers and hardcore hoop heads. This is episode 554. I am Andrew in our forum, Andrew NLSC on X. Joining me as always, my co-host Derek, DP3 in the forum, and DP3G and DP384 on X. Derek, it's your birthday this week, and quite honestly, what better present than to talk about two of our favourite topics, basketball and basketball video games. So please, tip us off.
Absolutely. Another year down and hopefully many more to come. Our main topics today also have community questions attached to them. First, I asked, why do you play basketball video games? Second, I asked the community, you can only choose 3 of these players to be brought into today's NBA, all in their prime. Who do you choose? I listed 2000 stars like Tracy McGrady, Yao Ming, Dirk Nowitzki, Kevin Garnett, Allen Iverson, Tim Duncan, Vince Carter, Jason Kidd, Steve Francis, or Dwayne Wade. So we will get to our choices and the community responses as part of the second segment of this show. And finally, we bring back the Andrew Asks segment, where Andrew asks me a question, and I give my response live on the air with no editing. When this segment appears on the show, just know that I have no idea what Andrew is going to ask. He doesn't tell me before we record. But Andrew, before we get into the main topics, I wanted to bring up something that showed up on my feed yesterday. There was a clip from Bill Simmons' Grantland show where he was interviewing Julius Erving. Simmons was asking Dr. J about the fight he had with Bird, where Bird was held back by Moses and Barkley, which enabled Erving to get several free jabs in on Bird, followed by both of them wrestling each other to the ground. Erving stated that Bird started the fight, but that's not what I found interesting, because we all know that Bird talked a lot of trash. It's no surprise to either of us or the basketball world who knows their history that Bird would start that fight. What I did find interesting, though, about this conversation was Erving's next comments, which were related to Erving's relationship with Bird off the court, specifically as it related to endorsements. Erving talked about how he worked closely with Bird on the one-on-one Dr. J versus Larry Bird Electronic Arts video game, which was first released for the Apple II computer in 1983 and was the first one-on-one basketball computer video game ever made. He talked about how they were there together at Electronic Arts in person to give the technicians direction on the gameplay, basically saying how Bird should shoot and where he should be effective most often, how Erving himself should be excellent at driving to the rim, etc. Also, him and Bird had an agreement that they would never sign the famous picture of Bird and Erving choking each other, which I believe actually happened during a preseason game. They agreed to never sign it due to the fact that they worked together on video games and that they were also partners with Converse, etc. They thought it would look bad for their mutual sponsors. So thought that was super cool. You know, the first one-on-one computer game ever made. And this is all the way back in 1983, so 31 years ago. Larry Bird and Julius Erving, I'm just trying to picture this, them sitting next to each other in a room talking to game developers, which he called technicians, so game technicians, giving them direction on how they should be represented in this video game. And if you think back then, you know, how primitive the video games were in the 80s. But really the process of getting them in the studio is no different than what it is today.
Yeah, that is fascinating. And of course, Larry Bird and Michael Jordan did the same thing for Jordan versus Bird all those years later, coming in and sitting with the developers, giving them those insights into where they shoot from and how they play and where they're most effective from. So it's really cool that such a primitive game, as you say, they were trying to go to that level of detail of capturing realism. So this idea, even today, if some people bring up, video games are video games, they don't need to be realistic. Even in the early days of video games, they were trying to get that authenticity, which is really cool. And I admire that. I admire that they had that professional courtesy and respect that, yes, things could get heated on the court. They weren't going to be friendly on the court, obviously, and things sometimes got out of hand, which, look, I'm not going to condone that, but it is what it is. That they still had that respect for each other, that they wouldn't sign that photo, they wouldn't make a big deal out of it, they wouldn't promote it, they would respect their professional commitments, and yeah, that they actually cared enough about games, because obviously video games back then, the whole video game crash of 1983, video games were not the big deal then as they are now. Obviously there were pinball machines and arcades and so forth, but video games were a very new form of media and not really respected. Even in our childhood, as you know, Derek, a lot of people turning their nose up at games. It's only kind of the early 2000s when that really mainstream popularity came about with games, and even kind of the late 2000s, 2010s when it went really mainstream and a really big part of pop culture with the crossover with the NBA and NBA 2K, obviously, and the players talking about their ratings and so forth. But obviously there was that care in the early days too, so that's fascinating, and I love hearing about it.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Just to let everybody know, too, one-on-one, Dr. J versus Larry Bird made several other appearances after the 1983 Apple II appearance. 1984, the game came out on Atari 8-bit, C64, and IBM PC. In 1985, it came out for Coco, Mac, and Spectrum. In 1986, it came out for Amiga. In 1987, Atari 78. 100, listed obviously as a single player or multiplayer game. I find the cover art for Dr. J versus Larry Bird, where Irving he's actually standing up against a wall with graffiti on it, shirtless, and Bird is sitting on a basketball with his arms crossed, and both of them look mean. I think that's some awesome cover art. They both look like they're pissed off. They look like they're ready to compete. Honestly, they look like they're ready to choke each other, Andrew. And what's funny about that picture that they referenced, the one where they were choking each other, we actually had that on our wall in our house when I was growing up. It was a black and white version of the picture. It was probably 11 by 17, maybe a little bit bigger. I can't remember. But it was a very clear shot of Bird and Irving having each other by the neck. I think that photo is iconic. And I think it's great that they were that competitive, not to the point of almost killing each other, but the fact that they were super competitive, they were playing in the same conference, etc. So yeah, I love that photo. But it sounds like if I ever brought it to Bird or Irving, they wouldn't sign it.
No, and of course they didn't want to team up and form a super team to win championships as well, just to throw that out there. And it's kind of a holy grail. I've kept an eye out on eBay for PC copies, that IBM DOS version of the game. Haven't come across it yet, but, fingers crossed, Derek.
That would be a good one to add to the collection. So, Andrew, you wanted to bring up the NBA Live 18 server shutdown. I'm guessing that this is a sad moment for you. You were still playing Ultimate Team on that game and showing your highlights and uploading footage to the NLSC. You've been featured in the top 10 multiple times with that NBA Live 18 Ultimate Team footage. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how sad are you right now?
I mean, I guess probably a 6 or a 7. And I'll explain why. Because I'm also getting into the 1 and the Pro-Am Tour, and that is actually still playable. The fact you have this fully featured career mode with the streets attached, that you can still play the Pro-Am Tour, playing these famous Pro-Am leagues in these iconic venues, is obviously good news. It's a shame to lose Ultimate Team because I was still playing it, still had a lot of challenges to play through, but still had a pretty good run with it. I am sad, of course, that I can't play with Legends in that game anymore. The only way to play with Legends in NBA Live 18 is to play with Ultimate Team, and of course to collect them in the first place. Naturally, there are many other games that I can play that do have Legends in them, NBA Live and NBA 2K, but I was enjoying playing with my squad of 90s All-Stars, so I definitely am a little bit sad about that. And it caught me off guard, because I hadn't been keeping up with any server announcements. I wasn't expecting it to happen, so I was surprised when it was brought up in our Discord that the servers had been shut down, but they have indeed been shut down. But I am impressed that my existing 1 save, is fully functional. Still has my face scan. I mean, if I reinstall the game, I'm probably going to lose it, so I won't be doing that. But I still have the face scan, still have the progress, can pick it up where I left off. The currency to buy cosmetic items is still there. The crates and the cosmetic items are still there. I can change the clothes of the player. I can change my accessories in the NBA side of things, so I can still customize my player, play the Pro-Am Tour, play the NBA side of the mode, the league, etc. And that is just something we can't do in NBA 2K. We don't have an offline version of My Career anymore. Haven't had that since 2K19. The writing was on the wall when they brought in the neighborhood, and now the city, of course. And even in the earlier games that do have an offline My Career, year by year it was getting stripped down. And even in 2K14, as much as I love my NBA 2K14, my career, as you know, Derek, as our listeners know, I'm sure, by this point, you can't change accessories. You can't add a sweatband or a headband now that the servers are offline, because that was attached to VC and online components. So this goes to show that you can have an offline My Career and continue a save even after the servers go down. Now, some people might say, oh, well, the servers were online for 7 years for Live 18, and the series is obviously dormant. But I doubt, Derek, that EA expected the series to be dormant when they were making NBA Live 18. I don't think they were making this with this situation in mind. They always designed this mode to continue on after the servers would be eventually shut down. Now, it's great that we got those extra 7 years to play a bit more Ultimate Team, to play the online modes in Live 18. Not a lot of people playing Live 18 now and playing those online modes. I was still having fun with it. But I'm impressed that there is this offline version of the one, that it does continue offline. And it just goes to show that there's no technical reason why 2K couldn't be doing this as well. It is just about getting people onto the new game where they're spending money on VC and so forth. And yes, it's a business, we all know that, but it's so anti-gamer, and it doesn't have to be this way, and this is proof.
Yeah, it's intentional on both sides, so for both companies. For NBA Live 18, EA Sports, intentionally, the developers had that conversation about, do we make this online only? Like, they're the one, right? And they had that conversation, and they decided that when the servers get shut down, that you should still be able to play that mode. They have to program that, right? So obviously they had those conversations, and that was their conclusion, that they wanted people to still be able to enjoy that. With 2K, again, they're having those same conversations, at Take-Two, and they're stating, well, let's make it so My Career is not available in 2 years when the servers shut down. That way, people have to get the new game in order to play My Career. So it's an obvious choice by those development teams, and unfortunately 2K went anti-consumer with their choice. I do find that it's admirable that EA left their servers up for so long. Same thing with NBA Live 16, etc. 7 years. That is a long time, Andrew.
Yeah.
To keep up the servers in order for people to play Ultimate Team, et cetera, especially for a game that really wasn't that popular, right? That wasn't received that well, that a lot of people thought could have used a lot of improvement, et cetera. I think that the fact that they left those on for gamers, et cetera, I think that was pretty cool, to do that for 7 years.
Absolutely. A game that was the best received NBA Live in years, although that was a low bar considering its immediate predecessors, obviously, and obviously the user base had moved on largely. And also, of course, it was still intended to be an annual release at that point. So to keep it up for 7 years is definitely an unusual show of goodwill for a AAA company, but I definitely appreciate it. And even without that online content, I was playing the offline stuff anyway, the single-player Pro Am Tour, the one. And of course, Ultimate Team is the only online connected mode that I was playing. That is unfortunate, but I still had a good run with it. Some great memories, some great highlights that I've still got saved. Obviously, I've got a few that I might still be able to put together as a compilation that I don't think I've shared yet, so I'll certainly look at doing that as a bit of a farewell to the mode, perhaps. But I can still play Live 18. I can still play with the latest roster update, which I've kept. I've made a couple of makeshift 2017 rosters, rolled the rosters back. So I've basically got a makeshift NBA Live 17, because, of course, there was no NBA Live 17. I've made some makeshift 2025 rosters. Not a lot of players, obviously, still there in the rosters 7 years ago. There's a lot of turnover in the league, Derek, as you know. But that's been fun to play a couple of games with as well. That's just a makeshift thing just to see what was possible and just to set up a couple of fun scenarios, which is what I'm doing with games these days, Derek, is just enjoying different scenarios. I still want to get into a dynasty or a franchise mode at some point and still weighing my options there and seeing which game I want to do it in. But playing exhibition games, as you know, has been so much fun for me. So Live 18 is still going to be in the rotation, and it can be, even without the servers. But at the same time, still sad to see them finally go.
Yeah, so we're going to have to connect on NBA Live 18 soon using the Xbox app. My Xbox One, as I stated in the Discord, it finally died. I had the original Xbox One 500 gigabyte console. How long have I had this thing? I've had this thing probably since 2000. 2016, maybe, because I had one in 2014, traded in for a gaming PC, and then a year or two later, I picked up again I bought the original console because there was still some new out there. Yeah, but it finally died, roughly 8 years later. And I ordered a 1 terabyte Xbox One from GameStop refurbished, because you can only get them either pre-owned or refurbished now. I haven't hooked it up yet. I'm hoping that it actually works well, because their refurbished Xbox Ones do not get strong ratings. And GameStop has not exactly been on top of their game over the last few years and whatnot. But we will see if I can get that hooked up and I can get the games working and everything's all right with the console. We'll have to connect on NBA Live 18.
Oh, definitely. We had a great session with an unusual underdog Lakers squad.
Yeah, that you would never have chosen by yourself. It took me connecting with you and just choosing them and being like, let's use Brandon Ingram and Lonzo Ball, Andrew, and Julius Randle. And you were like, all right.
I'm game.
And then we put up a bunch of great highlights, and we won that game, and that was a lot of fun.
Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, nba-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at nba-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community.
So, Andrew, let's get into today's main topics. I asked the community, why do you play basketball video games? And I gave some example responses. I've always loved basketball, bonding experience with family, a stress-free escape, etc. And then I also stated you can use specific examples if you want, and it can also be why I play video games in general. So not just basketball video games, but video games in general. So I'll start this off, Andrew. So for me, it's all three, but the main one is the bonding experience with my two brothers. It was also a hobby that I shared with my father growing up, but with my brothers, it has been a week in and week out thing for decades. It's been a go-to for decades. I can't even tell you how much I look forward to our sessions on hoop games, whether it be co-op or against. We have created countless memories on these games over the years, and many of them are part of daily conversations, jokes, playful taunting, etc. I've also loved basketball for my entire life, so that doesn't hurt. Watching, playing, hitting the virtual hardwood. For me, it's always been the best sport and the most fun. Countless memories watching hoop as well. Also, and this is a big one for a lot of people, it is absolutely a stress-free escape, especially if you stay away from the online scene in the newest 2Ks. Much like people who go to the gym or go hiking or sit down to watch a movie or a favorite show, basketball video games and video games in general do that for me. They give me a place to wind down, to have fun, to focus on something outside of day-to-day norms, and sometimes to also get those competitive juices flowing. So those are, the main reasons why I play basketball video games and often video games in general. What about you?
I mean, I'm very much the same. Obviously, longtime fan of basketball as well, and it's just another way to indulge that love. Thinking back to when I first became a full-on fan of basketball, you wanted to catch every game you could and watch NBA action every week and play in the playground with friends at lunchtime. We were doing that constantly in 1996, in Year 6, my final year of primary school. And, of course, basketball games were part of that. And, yes, it's also a way to bond with friends and family. My cousin Clinton is also a huge basketball fan. We were very close growing up. That was another thing that we could share, the love of basketball and playing basketball games together, always co-op. It certainly is a great stress relief, as you said. And also indulging fantasy. That is why I loved franchise modes, putting on that virtual GM suit, making the trades I wish the Bulls would make, or taking control of any team, really, and making wild deals, wheeling and dealing, and creating these fun scenarios, letting an alternate reality take shape, and playing through multiple seasons. just indulging that fantasy, and then having a sense of completion. And of course, that's a big thing in video games as well. I mean, playing games like Donkey Kong Country and Super Mario Brothers, you wanted to finish the game, right? You wanted to beat the final boss, you wanted to see the ending of games, and that wasn't always easy back in the day when you were renting them for a weekend, and the Nintendo hard games, as they call them on TV tropes, the incredibly difficult games with minimal continues or horrible controls. Bart versus Space Mutants, there's the obligatory reference there. But yeah, completion, indulging fantasy, and indulging the love of basketball. The fact that I could also share that with my cousin when he came to visit has also obviously been a solo activity for me as well, a way to unwind. So no, I can definitely relate to all of those reasons.
I want to say this about the Bart video games, the Simpsons video games for NES. So recently I tried the 2 other ones that had Bart involved.
Oh, versus the
so
world,
there's
yep.
3. There's Bart versus the Space Mutants, Bart versus the World, and Bartman versus Radioactive Man.
Yep.
All 3 of those games suck. And I know that you got used to Bart versus the Space Mutants, but we've agreed that the mechanics in that game are some of the worst.
Oh, yeah.
In video game history. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to try these other Bart games to see if they're as bad as Bart versus the Space Mutants. And Bart versus the World is an absolutely terrible video game. The effort into that game couldn't have been too high. And Bartman versus Radioactive Man, that game was the best of the 3. It had the best mechanics. You could kick bad guys. You could do some different things in there, but still, it's not a strong video game. So I don't think there were any strong Simpsons-related video games for 8-bit NES.
Oh no, they're all pretty weak, and it's only nostalgia and getting used to broken controls. I will say that the first level of Bart vs. the Space Mutants, for a Simpsons fan, because of all the references to the show, that first level, which is the best designed, such as it is, and with all the references to the show, it's like a one-level wonder, that game, and it's still not great. That's the only saving grace, is that first level has got some really nice references to the show, but the controls and the rest of the game, yeah, it is. It's not good. I certainly enjoyed it, ironically.
They gave up after the first level. They're like, we don't want to make this game anymore.
I think
we're just going to rush through it.
I think a different person designed every level because they're just so eclectic in a really bad way that it's fascinating. It's a fascinating disaster.
But guess what? They were able to capitalize off of that Simpsons name because you had it, right? And there were countless other people who bought the game. It actually kind of reminds me of games like Ghostbusters, which I know that some people thought, there were some people out there that thought it was okay. But that Ghostbusters game for NES was so bad. It has no redeeming qualities. The gameplay is absolutely terrible. The visuals are terrible, yeah. But they had a lot of people like us buy it because we were such fans of the movie.
It's Ghostbusters,
growing up and whatnot. Right. So it's kind of sad that companies were able to get away with that and, make a profit off of, a great show or a great movie, or sometimes, a great sport, a great league, etc. And they put like halfway or pitiful effort into that title and were able to get away with it. But anyway, so those are our thoughts. Let's get to the community, Andrew. Steven at the Live King states, stress-free escape and for the love of basketball. T. Gentry at Bucky T states, indeed, all 3. They really hit different when you've had a long week of work or school. Excellent decompressors, in my opinion. Don't see basketball video games any different than those who keep up with the latest TV shows. And we've talked about that on the past. Some people want to binge watch, I don't know, The Big Bang Theory or some other Netflix show or something like that. And, or they want to sit on Netflix all day and watch old movies, and that's their way to decompress. We just more often than not do it with video games. So it's the same idea. Knowledge Bone states his love for basketball. Ryan Cammons states, when I played ball as a kid, I used to play Bulls versus Lakers on the Genesis as a way to relax before my actual game later that day. And that's interesting, Andrew. Did you ever do that? Did you ever play a basketball video game before you had a league game or before you would go to the park to play pickup in order to kind of like either decompress or get yourself motivated, etc.?
I don't think so. I mean, my cousin and I, we would play games and then go into the backyard and shoot around and then come back in and watch some real highlights and play some games and go outside again. So it was kind of part of the rotation, so to speak. But for actual organized games, I remember watching real games and real highlights. Don't think I ever prepped myself by playing games, but that's an interesting approach. I like it.
Yeah, and I think he stated it as a way to relax.
Mm.
And, before the game, right. So I've stated it before on a past NLSC podcast. There were a couple things that I did that would get me pumped to play, to get me even more motivated. One of them was the movie White Men Can't Jump. So growing up, playing outside, playing on the blacktop, going to the park, all of that stuff, that was it. That's the way we played, right? And, you'd try to get some 5-on-5 in, but oftentimes it was 2-on-2 or 3-on-3. And actually, more often than not, it was 1-on-1, 2-on-2, or 3-on-3. It was half court. And White Men Can't Jump was played constantly when I was a kid on HBO. And I also believe it was on Showtime, and we had both of those channels. And whenever I saw that it was coming on, and it would usually come on in the morning or, around noon or 2 o'clock or something like that, I would watch it. And, watching Snipes and Woody Harrelson out there playing, 2-on-2, and then them, challenging other street hoopers, et cetera. And, the King and the Duck, all that stuff, like that would get me absolutely pumped up to go play street hoops in real life. So that was one of the things that movie White Men Can't Jump would get me all pumped up to go play outside. The other thing was Jason Williams highlights later on. So I just hit the ball on the string, the passes that he would make, the amazing highlight reels that people would put together on social media. And at the time, it was mostly just on YouTube and whatnot. I would, before a league game, before, pickup night, et cetera, I would watch those Jason Williams highlights, and I would try to envision myself doing those on the court that night, and it would be an extra motivator for me. So those were a couple of my go-tos.
Oh, totally get it. And that is a fantastic movie. I think I've heard that Snipes and Harrelson, towards the end there, they had gotten so good at the game that some observers said that they were kind of on the level of Division III NCAA players. Yeah,
apparently Woody Harrelson was better than Snipes on the court. That's what everybody was saying. So that is interesting. I'm guessing they were playing a lot at the time in order to, represent properly in the movie, in order to play their roles. Garva is Great states, a stress-free escape. Moreover, I can go back in time and watch old hoops to learn more about its history and players, which is amazing. We talked about that, how basketball video games can kind of be like almanacs in their own way. You can go back and look at the rosters of the time. You can click on the player profile in a lot of the games, and it will give you tidbits of information about them. Sometimes it shows their stats, etc. So, I know that you love that piece that, about basketball video games, that they are, great for history as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I overuse the term, I know, on the podcast and in articles, interactive almanacs, but they really are, aren't they?
They really are. Garva also stated, I don't know, maybe there's something poetic about old hoops. I agree. Just love it. I love talking about, the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, mid 2000s, etc. There's something about it.
Absolutely.
And we had a response from Royce as well. At Royce Brink 14, he states, it's all three, honestly. I have played with friends and family and love these times and memories. The stress-free escape is what I think as gamers everyone would like in a game. I don't want to play a game about real life. Yeah, no, sorry. Also, we the gamers get to be our favorite stars of, quote, now and then, end quote, to use a Beatles quote. And we can be the one with the ball or player lock and call for the ball and go from there. Modern life is stressful, and that is one of the reasons why we as gamers come to the virtual hardwood. And then he states, my first basketball video game was NES Double Dribble. So I have been here for a while, but really got back into it the last year or two, thanks to the NLSC, D for 3, Andrew, and the NLSC community, and not just 2K, but live, street hoops, ballers, and other games. And lastly, he says, so yes, please keep showing the highlights, gameplay videos, and more, because there are some of us who watch these and go find the games to try out these moves, teams, players, etc. Thank you from a fan and a community member. Also, thanks for accepting me. Means a lot to me. So some nice words there from Royce, and we'll continue to upload those gameplay videos and whatnot. I want to touch on one point that he made. Is he stated he didn't want to play a game that wasn't about real life. So he's not into like fantasy games. He wants to play a game about basketball, and he loves basketball. So he wants to use the players that, you know, he saw or is seeing in real life on the virtual hardwood, and that's part of the fix for him. And I think that that's one of the biggest drivers for a lot of people for playing these basketball video games. And that's why we talked about it on prior episodes, that you can't take the NBA out of these popular basketball video games. If you remove the NBA, the game loses a huge part of their audience, right?
Oh, yeah.
It loses the lore. What most people want to do is they want to jump on an NBA video game, Andrew, and they want to use Anthony Edwards. They want to use Joel Embiid. They want to use Kawhi Leonard. They want to use Paul George, Ja Morant, etc. And they want to, you know, do moves with those players like they saw them do in real life. The majority of the basketball fan base are fans of the NBA, right? So there was this big thing when EA Sports canceled the NBA Live series again, where people were like, oh, they should just make a street game. They should just remove NBA from NBA Live and make it like Live Street or something like that.
Oh, that'll sell.
It's like, you guys don't get it.
Yeah.
Like the NBA is still the draw. And in my opinion, it will always be the draw. So I do like that point by Royce.
And of course, thank you so much for the kind words, Royce. We really do appreciate the support. Royce has let me know about some of his recent pickups, actually, based on some of our conversations on the podcast and our highlights that we've shared. Interested to hear your thoughts on those, Royce. Please reach out with those. And he also brings up a great point about community, that being a gamer allows you to be part of gaming communities. Obviously, we have a long-running one at the NLSC, and it's been a way to meet people from around the world, develop friendships across the oceans, across the continents. So that's a really cool part of gaming as well. That's a great reason to game. Of course, online gaming is part of that, but it can be toxic at times. But we like to have a non-toxic community at the NLSC.
And you don't get that from watching, like, Netflix, right? Like binge watching your favorite Netflix show. I know that you love Desperate Housewives, Andrew, but you haven't met any best friends through watching that series on Netflix.
It's going to stick. It's going to stick that I'm a Desperate Housewives fan. But I've actually never seen an episode. But yeah, it's been special being a part of the community for over 20 years now.
Yeah, I love it. I love the NLSC. I love the basketball gaming community. I love, you know, seeing all the responses from that community to my community questions each week. It hasn't gotten old. In fact, it's just as exciting now as when I first put out the first community question, to be honest with you. So we did receive a couple of responses on Discord. Avery states, for the love of the game, and it's a good time waster with friends. Vetman says, love basketball and enjoy sandboxing my own NBA alternate reality. And that's what's great about the games that have a lot of customization. You know, for those on PC, the people that are able to mod and, you know, create jerseys that aren't in the game, create courts that aren't in the default game, create players that are not in the default game, cyber faces for them, etc. It really is an escape. It can really be an escape into an alternate reality. And I love when basketball video games get released and by default, they have a lot of great customization options, because that means people on PC and on console can kind of get that fix. And even something like fantasy drafts, which my brothers and I go to often to create that, you know, alternate experience, that fantasy on the virtual hardwood. That, for me, that's been a go-to for a very long time. For us, it's, players that have never played together before hitting the virtual hardwood together. So yeah, I love that response by Vetman.
For sure, and obviously I relate to that with how I approach Dynasty mode, franchise modes in general, creating my own reality. I'm not trying to replicate the results. I'm trying to lead the Bulls to title number 7 over and over again, I suppose. And whether it's setting up a complete fantasy draft situation as you do, wheeling and dealing and having CPU teams make fictional trades as well, you are creating that fictional reality and answering what if and playing out these fun scenarios. And of course, being huge basketball fans, there's times when your team loses, it gets knocked out of the playoffs, for example, and it's a bummer, obviously. So then you go and you right that wrong, so to speak, in games, and you drop 60 points on a player you don't like. Once again, the love of basketball games and basketball, it's intertwined, obviously.
So, Andrew, you stated there was a couple responses on other platforms.
Yes, we've got a couple of responses on Facebook. Ron says, bonding with friends and an avid basketball fan, so familiar reasons there, which we can certainly relate to. Renee says, I've been playing basketball video games for almost 40 years, started with double dribble like Derek did. I love the fast-paced nature of the sport and how easy they are to pick up and play. I do a lot of minimal modding to rosters, and that is very relaxing and therapeutic for me. I love how we can basically recreate NBA history through video games, and I love reliving my childhood through it. And Jared also adds, I love the mod capabilities of games like 2K and being able to cobble together basically whatever slice of history you want. So once again, interactive almanacs and adding to those interactive almanacs, obviously, and minimalist modding. As you know, Derek, I've been doing a lot of that. Mentioned some of it at the top of the show with Live 18. That is a lot of fun, and creating those scenarios out of what's in the game. And during my NBA 2K6 kick, of course, putting together some retro teams from the early 2000s, rolling the clock back a bit, using the retro jerseys to stage some 2002, 2003 matchups. Yeah, just using games as a springboard to fun that isn't necessarily intended, but is certainly possible.
When you come from the 8-bit generation of video games, or the 16-bit generation, when your first basketball video games were either double dribble, or, maybe they were on Super Nintendo, like Tecmo Super NBA Basketball, or maybe NBA Showdown was your first game, etc. When you come from that time and you're still playing basketball video games today, you really see how far we've come. And it gives you a deeper appreciation for what's happening right now with video game technology. And I want to give a point really quick. So my brother and I recently started a season on NBA Live 96 for Sega Genesis using the Hidden Legends, Andrew, because and I know they got in trouble for that, but if you put Michael Jordan in the create a player, it actually creates the actual Michael Jordan, and then you can put him on a roster, even though they didn't have a license for him. Same thing with Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell and Julius Erving and Oscar Robertson and Wilt Chamberlain and whatnot, and Kareem. So we put them all on a team and we're playing against the computer, and this game is still fun, right? Like the up and down action, it's fast paced, the stat accumulation, some of the highlights. I showed a no look pass from Bird to Jordan on the Discord, and it looked great. But that was it back then. That was elite, and the options in the video game were elite. And then you play 2K25, and now that's the newest, and it's got all of these different mechanics, and you can now do jump stops and dribble moves and fadeaways, and you can do all of this different stuff that you had no shot of being able to do in NBA Live 96 because the games couldn't do that back then. They couldn't be programmed that way. And then you get a close-up of a player on NBA 2K25, and it's like, damn, that looks exactly like them. But, you go back to NBA Live 96, and it's like, hey, he has 2 eyes. He's a human.
Yeah.
Right.
Look at beard.
Right. Exactly. So I think that you have a deeper appreciation for what they're doing now with video games as a result of, being around when the 8-bit and 16-bit consoles were new and elite and the best.
I mean, go onto the NLSC, NBA-live.com, of course, go to the NBA Live 98 portal and look at our NBA Live 98 wish list that our founders put together all those years ago. Go down that list and see just how much stuff that's on that list has been added to games over the years. It's incredible.
It's insane. So, Andrew, let's get to the second main topic, which is another community question. I asked the community, you can only choose 3 of these players to be brought into today's NBA in their prime. Who do you choose? And the choices were Tracy McGrady, Yao Ming, Dirk Nowitzki, Kevin Garnett, Allen Iverson, Tim Duncan, Vince Carter, Jason Kidd, Steve Francis, and Dwayne Wade. So we'll go back and forth on our choices. So who do you have first?
This was probably harder than last week's question, trying to pick from that selection of older legends. But my first pick is Yao Ming. And there is an obvious reason for that, because of course these days we have Wemby at 7'4". It would be really fun to see 2 very talented players over 7'2" going head to head, different styles, of course. And Yao Ming, he had a great NBA career by many metrics, but the injury still left a case of what if. So bringing him into the modern game and seeing how he would go against Wemby, bringing back some of that post game, obviously more of a traditional big in that sense, although he did have shooting touch and range, as we know. But yeah, Yao Ming in the modern game, and also, of course, international players getting more of a chance right out of the gate. It didn't take too long for Yao to get into the starting lineup. I think he came off the bench for his first 10 games or so. Then there was that big breakout performance against Shaq, which was very exciting back in the days, I'm sure you recall, Derek. But yeah, Yao versus Wemby. I'm intrigued by that.
Yeah, I think that Yao, before his injuries, could really move too. He was good at getting up and down the court.
Definitely.
And whatnot, even for his size. And he had all the moves in the post. He had that little post fadeaway that he went to. Actually, I think he hit a couple game winners on that little fadeaway that he had in the post. And, he had the half hooks, and he was really good around the rim and good rim protector. Yeah, I think that Yao would be better in today's NBA. And I'm sure that if they asked him to stretch it out a little bit, he'd be able to be a stretch 5. He was very consistent in the mid-range, taking those shots, feeling comfortable in those areas, and he had an effortless shot. So yeah, I agree. I think Yao would be really fun to see in today's NBA, especially when you see a guy like Zach Edey, who plays for the Grizzlies. He's also listed at 7'4", and you see him at times having his way. Against the Nets earlier this season on November 4th, he had 25 points and 12 rebounds on 91.7% shooting, 11 for 12 from the field. He also had 4 blocks in that game. I watch a guy like Edey, who is very methodical in comparison to Yao. I don't think he moves even close to as well. You see him thriving on the court in today's NBA at times, and he's only 22 years old. I just think Yao is a far more skilled player than him and even moves better. So yeah, I think Yao would be amazing today. My first choice, Andrew, was actually Dirk Nowitzki, 7-footer with great feet, limitless range, and the ability to get his shot off efficiently against anybody. Look no further than when the less athletic Dirk in the 2010 playoffs embarrassed Ibaka, Bosch, Odom, Paw, and Bynum, and others, effortlessly shooting over them. I think that the early mid-2000s Dirk was even better. I think he was actually a great athlete for his size up and down the floor, oftentimes bringing up the ball in a point forward capacity. I just think young prime Dirk would be the best player in today's NBA. I think that it's possible that he would thrive even more now, given the lax defensive rules, given the fact that he would have even more space to shoot, the fact that there are landing space fouls now that would allow him to shoot, without worrying about super hard contests. I think that he was incredibly mobile, in the early mid-2000s, and I just think he would be unstoppable today.
His game, his skill set definitely seems to be tailor-made for the current NBA, doesn't it? I think he would absolutely thrive, and people do forget that he was a fine athlete as well as obviously a fantastic shooter. And going back to the point that I made about Yao, you don't have that same prejudice against international players that were still there in the mid to late 90s when he was drafted by the Bucks originally and then traded to Dallas for Robert Traylor, I want to say off the top of my head. There's a deal for you. But yeah, he would get those opportunities right out of the gate, and yeah, he would absolutely thrive.
So who's your next choice, Andrew?
So I'm going to go with Vince Carter, because I love dunks, Derek, and he was such an exciting player to watch. I'm glad that the Raptors did retire his jersey. There was obviously a lot of bad blood there for years. We remember him getting booed in NBA Live 10 whenever he played in Toronto. Of course, if you traded him back to the Raptors, they would actually cheer him. That was a good bit of programming there. But such an exciting player. Not just the dunks, obviously. The acrobatic layups. He could shoot. Not the best defender, but certainly a capable defender. Yeah, one of the most exciting players in league history. If I have the chance to bring him into the modern game, I'm absolutely doing it.
So Carter, for me, it was between Carter and T-Mac, and I actually chose T-Mac, but I want to say something about Carter real quick. I would just love to see kids' reactions today to Carter's aerial play. The poster dunks, the style he had in the air. I also think that his game would be more appreciated today and he would excel even more. Carter was often criticized, if you remember correctly, Andrew, for taking too many outside shots. Well, in today's NBA, it's like they would be like, "Have at it, Vince."
Yeah.
He would be good to go now. In today's NBA, his shot selection would not be frowned upon like it was when he was young and in his prime in that NBA. And similar to Dirk, I think in today's NBA, he would have more room to shoot. I think that he wouldn't have to worry as much about hard contests. I think that the lane would be wider and more open now. I think he would be dealing with less defenders at the rim. I think he would be celebrated more on social media even than he was back then. So yeah, I agree with you. Vince Carter would be just awesome in today's NBA. But Andrew, I actually chose Tracy McGrady as my second choice. And I want to give an example why. So Tracy McGrady averaged 32.1 points per game in 02-03. And what do we know about that time in the NBA? Low scoring, right? Teams weren't averaging as much. The defense, hand checking was still happening in the league. The game was still incredibly physical in the early 2000s. And if you watch some of that T-Mac footage, oftentimes defenders had their hands all over him. The paint was often packed when he got there, etc. I want to give an example of why I think Tracy McGrady would average over 40 points per game in today's NBA. So he was doing that back then. And this is no respect to SGA, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, but he averaged 30.1 last year in 75 games. And this year he's averaging 26.3. And in 22-23, Andrew, he averaged 31.4 in 68 games. Now, SGA is 6'6", 180 pounds. That's what he's listed at. T-Mac was a couple inches taller at 6'8", listed at 210. You can see it by the footage that Tracy McGrady was bigger. He had wider shoulders. He was stronger as a player. McGrady was also a much better athlete than SGA. He was a better leaper, faster up and down the floor, quicker, stronger, all of that stuff. He rose up on his shots higher. He had a higher release than SGA. He could get his shot off in different ways. He was far better, in my opinion, at attacking the rim. You're telling me that Tracy McGrady wouldn't be 40 plus points per game in today's NBA with all of those advantages to his game? I just don't see it. I just find him to be a more skilled player, a better athlete, etc. I think that there was also an interview with Tracy McGrady, and I want to say that either aired this year or last year, where he stated, I would average over 40 points per game. He said it. I would average over 40 points per game in today's NBA, and these are the reasons why. And actually, Vince Carter, who we just talked about, was in an interview a couple days ago, and he stated that most of the NBA players today wouldn't be able to handle the physicality, rule changes, and hand checking of previous eras. He was actually on a podcast with Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson. So, yeah, I just think, you see a guy like SGA doing what he's doing today, and I don't know how you couldn't think that Tracy McGrady would be a 40-point scorer and just unstoppable in today's game.
And an exciting player, too. He was flashy and capable of great highlights.
Exactly. So who's your last choice?
So before I get to the last choice, I will make an honourable mention of Tim Duncan, just to have that big fundamental and that traditional post player in today's NBA, just to show that such a player could still dominate. I believe he absolutely would. And of course, Duncan did have a respectable shooting touch as well. Could even hit a few threes towards the end of his career. He had a couple of game-winning threes, as I'm sure you recall. But I'm going to go with Allen Iverson, because you talk about exciting players who would thrive in an up-and-down game and with the green light to just fire away. that is certainly Allen Iverson. You look at the way that dribbling is officiated these days, he would have so many amazing crossovers and ankle breakers in today's NBA. AI is just one of those players that, I mean, it's always difficult to call a Hall of Famer and one of the all-time greats underrated, but it's kind of getting that way. I mean, that's sort of the way it's going with a lot of older players, obviously, but AI is overlooked. You know, they look at his efficiency numbers and shooting percentages. They don't tell the whole story of just what an incredible basketball player Allen Iverson was. Yeah, I'd love to see him wreak havoc on today's NBA as well.
So, yeah, my choice was also Allen Iverson as my third choice. I think Iverson, as a basketball player, clears a guy like Kyrie Irving by a wide margin. And that's in my opinion. You can have your opinion on it. I think he clears him by a wide margin. I think he had more control with the ball. I think that he was shiftier. He had more ways to elude defenders and get to his shot. He made more big defensive plays, getting in passing lanes and whatnot. I think he was better in the mid-range and going to the hoop than Kyrie. I don't think you would be seeing as many people, including media today, saying that Kyrie has the best handles in the NBA if Iverson was in the NBA today. Some people try to state that Kyrie may have the best handles of all time, and I don't think that's the case. I don't think he has better handles than Steph Curry in today's game, and I have stated my reasons for that many times. I think that if you ask Kyrie Irving to do what Steph Curry does, as a person bringing up the ball, as far as eluding defenders in the backcourt and keeping that ball on a string, pushing the pace the way that Steph Curry does with his dribble, Kyrie couldn't do it. I don't think that he has that type of handle. I think that Curry also gives you those handles in the one-on-one space. We've all seen the behind the backs, the crossovers, the hesitations from Curry that just leave defenders absolutely in the dust. I think as an overall ball handler, so with the point guard handles combined with the one-on-one handles, etc., I don't think that Kyrie Irving is even a better ball handler than Steph Curry. So I think that Iverson would be considered the best ball handler in today's NBA if he played now, and I think that he would be on social media constantly. Kids today would love Allen Iverson's game, even as it was, if you brought it into today's game. So, yeah, I think Allen Iverson would be awesome.
And you talk about all-time great handles. Joe Dumas is a player that you brought up before as a player who is often overlooked for having great handles. And, of course, Pete Maravich. What happened to appreciating Pete Maravich's handles? And yes, obviously you couldn't put his hand under the ball because that was the way dribbling was officiated back then. But
that's what makes it more impressive as a basketball fan, right? As somebody who truly appreciates the sport and understands how it's played and who plays himself. Like, I find that the ability that he had to have that ball on the string, even though he was restricted by the rules of the time, I find that incredibly impressive.
And of course, Pete Maravich used to practice dribbling with a tennis ball. You're going to have great handles after that.
Pretty sure he was also noted for dribbling outside his car door.
And, and in movie theaters as well, which was probably a bit inconsiderate, but still.
Right. In high school, just to let everybody know, I brought my basketball to class, and everybody kind of thought that was weird. But I'd bring it to class, and I would put it under my seat. And whenever there was a chance to get down to the gym to shoot, I'd always know that my basketball was on me, right? And I'd be able to take advantage of that opportunity. I actually received an in-school suspension, Andrew, my only one ever, for sneaking down to the gym, saying I had to go to the bathroom, and I brought my basketball. And I snuck down to the gym, was putting up shots, and teacher came down, opened the door, and goes, "Hey, Derek, come with me." And so I got in trouble in high school for doing that. But that's how much I love basketball.
Absolutely, for the love of the game. I keep a basketball in the boot of my car, or the trunk, as you call it over there, of my car, because who knows when you're driving along in a street ball tournament is going to be happening. So, You
got to jump out.
Yeah. Jump
into it, right? So let's get to the responses. Steven at the Live King states, McGrady or AI, they would drop 100 in this era. So he didn't choose 3, just chose those 2, but those were 2 of my choices. T Gentry at Bucky T says AI KG, and honestly Dirk as well. I feel he's slightly underrated. He was actually running the floor really, really well in his younger years too. That's what I mentioned. He also mentioned AI like I did, but he mentions KG. Just imagine KG in today's NBA, Andrew, at his peak, young, primed KG. He'd probably get thrown out of a lot of games if he had the same personality that he did, with the taunting and the aggressive way that he played. But his skill set, I just think he would be unbelievable in today's NBA. JMO at the original JMO says number one has to be AI because of how mesmerizing his handles can be. Then T-Mac and Yao. Those are my other two, because I feel we did not get to see enough from them together because of injuries. And that mid-2000s Rocket team had insane potential. So he also chose Yao, but T-Mac and AI just like I did. And yeah, T-Mac and Yao, they didn't get enough time together, Andrew, and I wish they had stayed healthy.
22 straight wins in that 2008 season, despite the fact they were both missing games. And of course, Steve Francis was back on that team. T-Mac and Francis once traded for each other, and Francis, ending back up in Houston, was injured for most of that season, including that 22-game winning streak. Imagine if he was still healthy, and you've got a healthy Francis, T-Mac, and Yao all together. That's quite a video game trio.
Francis, in an interview, stated that the franchise may have gotten him back, but they had moved on from him. That there were times where he knew he could play and he could contribute, and that he felt the same as he did, from his All-Star days, and that they just wouldn't play him. So interesting tidbit there. Another writer at Storyteller 1983 says Dirk, Duncan, and KG. So he went all power forwards. And then he says, it would be so fun to see prime Duncan line up with young Wemby, or prime Dirk getting passes from prime Luka, or having the greenest of green lights to pull up from 25. Yeah, give the best version of Dirk, young Dirk or prime Dirk, etc., the green light that players get today, and just see what happens, Andrew. Royce gave a pretty lengthy response, but I'll get to part of it. He states, Timmy D, KG, T-Mac, or AI. Honorable mentions to Dirk and Stevie franchise. Timmy D, yeah, I know I would be labeled boring, but man, would he be lighting it up down low. Quote, putting the ball on the deck, end quote, if I can borrow Derek's phrase again, and running the floor, back his defender down, and make other players better. And his defense, which is a forward's concept in current NBA, he states, and he can finish too at the rim and close out games. Also, he would not be a distraction. And by the way, he wins. AG, his leadership, defense, back to the basket and facing the basket game, running the floor, finishing at the rim, great teammate, makes other players better and can win. And then he states T-Mac, tall guy who can create for himself, assist, play defense, steals and blocks, can close out games and finish at the rim and above it. So there was choices, Andrew, and him and I definitely agree on Tracy McGrady. As it relates to Tim Duncan and KG, I think that they are no-brainers. I just think that they would absolutely excel in any era that you put them in.
Yeah, like I said, this was a tough list that you threw out there. I actually had an easier time with the older legends, as I said, if for no other reason that Michael Jordan was on that list, so I already had one pick that I knew I was going to make. But yeah, very tough choice to make. I did think about KG as well as Duncan, of course, but yeah, I went with Yao. But yeah, I can't fault the choice of KG or Duncan.
So I did receive one response on Discord. Avery states Tracy McGrady, Iverson, and Francis, followed by a lot of people forget T-Mac had a crazy 9-year stretch of being an MVP candidate, and people forget how cold Steve Francis was. Yeah, I think Steve Francis would be a social media sensation today. His athleticism, his handles, I think that he would be more efficient in today's NBA. I think he would be absolutely unbelievable. Like, look at what guys are doing in today's NBA, putting up 20-plus points per game, being talked about fondly on social media, and they don't have half the game that Steve Francis had. So I definitely agree with Avery.
And looking at the responses on Facebook, a lot of familiar picks, Derek, probably not a surprise. Godfrey says, Prime T-Mac, AI, and Dirk, they'll be a beast in this era. Martin says, McGrady would be a walking cheat code in this era, as would AI. Renee says, KG for his passion, intensity, and love for the game. Vinsanity for the incredible dunks and highlights. Iverson for the entertainment value on and off the court. Practice? Yeah, that's another big thing too that people love the personalities of the game.
That's missing today. I don't think the stars have as much personality. I don't think the NBA in itself is as appealing as it used to be. And that's unfortunate. It makes me not want to put it on as much. And I think that you're the same way.
Definitely. Ron says T-Mac, Dirk, and Yao. Says Yao, I think he would be like a Joker 2.0, if he came along today, obviously. Jamal says Dirk, Vince, and Tracy. Can't touch him, so they'll score even more. Stephen F. says Yao, I'd love to see him go up against Wemby. Definitely agree there. AI, good interviews. Vince Carter, dunk competitions. Fernie says McGrady, Iverson, and Yao Ming. Clemens says Wade, Dirk, and Duncan. Eric says Yao, Dirk, and Iverson. And Roy says Prime Yao, simply because he didn't have a fair shot because of injuries. The rest of the list all had star-making seasons. So yeah, I see that's another reason for picking Yao. I mentioned that as well, if he could be healthier than he was, obviously. And a pick for Wade there.
I'll use the same examples that I used with T-Mac as it compares to SGA. Can you imagine Wade in today's NBA being given the freedom that SGA has? And Wade averaged 30 at his peak as well, when the game was a bit more physical and the rules didn't cater so much to the offense. So yeah, I think Wade would be unbelievable today. As it relates to the dunk contest, yeah, I mean, you put Vince Carter in today's NBA and instantly the dunk contest gets interesting again, right? It instantly becomes more fun. And I think if you had a guy in today's NBA like Vince Carter who participated in the dunk contest and he was a league star, I think that you'd get a couple other league stars, jumping into it as well. So that could revive the dunk contest, to be honest with you.
I mean, the dunks that Vince did in 2000 in the social media age, just imagine the views they would get.
Exactly. So Andrew, you have a question for me as part of the Andrew Asks segment. So what do you got?
I do indeed. And I've been playing some 8th Gen NBA Live recently. NBA Live 18, obviously, as I mentioned at the top of the show. Also some NBA Live 16. Those are my two favorite 8th Gen NBA Lives. That is, maybe damning them with faint praise. It wasn't the strongest generation for NBA Live, but those two releases definitely had their strong points, particularly 18 for me. In the process of going back and playing these 8th Gen NBA Live games, I also put on NBA Live 14. I needed to look up something for a future article, get some screenshots, and when I'm getting screenshots, I end up playing the game a bit. And with Live 14, it went about as well as you would expect. But I was reminded, Derek, that I really like the menus and the front end in NBA Live 14, and the way the pause menu fits in with the ESPN presentation. And I also like the ESPN presentation. The presentation was really good in Live 14. And it got me thinking about games that are bad, games that I don't like, yet have something that I really, really like about them. And again, with Live 14, that is the menus, the aesthetic, and the NBA on ESPN presentation. So I was wondering, Derek, I'm asking you, what are some of your favorite features in your least favorite basketball video games?
Boy, on the spot. So I would say that there are games in the past that I've played where I wish that the gameplay could match the appeal I had for other aspects. And an example would be ESPN NBA Tonight, right? Like, I think that the presentation was excellent in that game. I love the menus. I feel like they did a good job of bringing NBA on ESPN to the forefront and making it seem very realistic. But then, of course, when you hit the hardwood on ESPN, NBA Tonight, and the second version of that game, the gameplay is incredibly rough. It's hard to even get through a full game on that one because the gameplay mechanics are poor. The visual appeal really isn't there. It's just not strong like the menu system. This one might surprise you. I always thought it was a waste of the NBA on NBC presentation to have it only included in NBA Showtime, which was a great game. I loved NBA Showtime. But having that NBA on NBC presentation in a 2-on-2 full court arcade basketball game, as opposed to having it in a 5-on-5 game, I think that was a missed opportunity. Because when you boot up NBA Showtime, NBA on NBC, you get the real NBA on NBC intro, right? And the action that you're watching there is from 5-on-5 games, 5-on-5 games that you and I, were watching at the time or grew up watching, etc. And it's awesome that, they've got the NBC music, the presentation is beautiful. And then you hit the floor and it's this zany, fast-paced action with guys who look like WWF action figures, right?
Bulky.
Like they're way too muscular, etc. And it's like, this isn't what I would want my NBA on NBC game to be represented by. Nothing wrong with that game, but imagine if they had had that full NBA on NBC presentation in a good 5-on-5 sim. We would have loved that, Andrew. That would have rocked. So I always thought that was a missed opportunity. So yeah, I think those would be the two that come to mind first, specifically the NBA on NBC one. And I think our listeners would agree that it would have been really awesome to see a 5-on-5 sim with that full NBA on NBC presentation.
For sure, and that was a wishlist staple for a while there, while the NBA on NBC was a thing originally, of course. So, and I see where you're coming from, that it is great in that game. That is a strong game. It's not my favorite arcade game and from Midway, my favorite in the NBA Jam lineage, so to speak, but it is a very strong release in its own right, and that does enhance it, having that NBA on NBC presentation. Of course, it does make a hell of a mouthful of a title, NBA on NBC, NBA Showtime. It's a bit repetitive there, but can't judge a book by its cover, can't judge a basketball game by its title sometimes. I'll throw in another one. The Temple in NBA Live 07. Apart from looking at the rosters for the 2007 season, it might be the only reason to boot up NBA Live 07 for Xbox 360 to shoot around in the Temple and see that rather creative design again. Of course, it was in the Xbox 360 version of NBA Live 06 as well, but that was a really cool idea, being able to shoot around immediately after booting up the game.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, and I think that's an implementation that would be welcome in any basketball video game.
Deserve to be in a better game, and I think that's the common theme of what I'm getting at here, is that you see these things in games that are not so great or indeed awful, and you think, man, I wish we could have had it in a much better game.
Yeah, I mean, there was NBA Jam 2004, which had the retro filters, right?
True.
And, back at the time I was playing that game, and I was like, man, I wish they could bring these retro filters into a 5-on-5 sim. Because, we didn't have that in, NBA Live 2004 or NBA Live 2003, or the 2K series at the time. So I don't think that NBA Jam 2004 is that strong of a game. I don't think it stands up to many of the other Jam games in the series. So yeah, I wish those filters had been part of a better game.
And of course, I'll throw the question out to our listeners as well. Let us know in the comments, what are some features in games that you don't really like that you wish were in a better game? And to that point, are pretty much the only good part of a game you hate. But speaking of community participation, thank you once again to everybody who answered Derek's community questions. We love touching on these subjects each and every week and reading out your responses.
Yep, thank you everybody who responded, and I love the detail that you put into those responses and how well thought out they were. So yeah, I appreciate it.
With that being said, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. As always, thank you for tuning in, and please join us again next week and every week, either on the NLSC, nb-live.com, our YouTube channel, or wherever you listen to podcasts. In the meantime, make sure you're following us on social media. That's where you can get in touch with us, and of course, stay up to date with all of our content. So Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
Yep, you can reach me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at D43G and at D4384. I'm also on the NLSC, D43, and on YouTube, D43.
As for me, I'm Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on X. The NLSC is on X and Facebook at the NLSC. We're also NLSC Basketball on Instagram and Threads. We're on YouTube at NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep it locked to the NLSC itself, nb-live.com, for everything we do for basketball video games. So, thank you once again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.